The psychology of seizing and incorporating, like that of eating in general, is still completely unexplored. We tend to take the whole process for granted and never reflect on the mysteriousness of much that occurs in the course of it. There is nothing about us which is more strongly primitive. It is something we share with animals, but even this strange fact has not so far made us pay more attention to it. The approach, with hostile intent, of one creature to another falls into several distinct acts, each of which has its particular traditional significance. First there is the lying in wait for prey. The prey is marked down long before it is aware of our designs on it. With feelings of pleasure and approval it is contemplated, observed and kept watch over. It is seen as meat whilst it is still alive, and so intensely and irrevocably seen as meat that nothing can deflect the watcher's determination to get hold of it. Already while he is prowling round it he feels that it belongs to him. From the moment he selects it as his prey, he thinks of it as incorporated into himself. This watching and lying in wait for prey is a state of such peculiar tension that it can acquire a significance of its own independent of circumstances. It is a state which one tends to prolong. Later it may be induced for its own sake, without reference to any immediate prospect of prey. But man does not lie in ambush and turn persecutor with impunity. Anything of this kind which he actively undertakes, he also experiences passively in himself, in exactly the same form, only more strongly, for his greater intelligence is aware of more dangers and doubles the torment of being persecuted. Man is not always strong enough to obtain his prey directly. The skill and experience in pursuit which he has acquired have resulted in his developing all kinds of complicated traps. Often he makes use of the power of transformation which is his specific gift and appears disguised as the animal he is after. He acts it so well that it believes him. This manner of trapping an animal may be termed flattery. The animal is told, "I am like you. I am you. You can safely let me come near you." After the stealthy approach and the leap treated in another context, the next thing is the first touching of the prey. This is perhaps what is feared most. The fingers of the attacker feel what will soon belong to his whole body. Contact through the other senses, sight, hearing and smell, is not nearly so dangerous. With them there can be space between the attacker and the victim and, as long as this space exists, nothing is finally decided and there is still some chance of escape. The sensation of touch, on the other hand, is the forerunner of tasting. The fairy tale witch asks her victim to stretch out a finger so that she can feel whether he is fat enough to eat. The design of one body on the other becomes concrete from the moment of touching. Even at the lowest levels of life this moment has something decisive about it. It contains the oldest terrors, we dream of it, we imagine it, and civilized life is nothing but a sustained effort to avoid it. Whether resistance is continued after this moment, or is given up completely, depends on the ratio of power between the toucher and the touched, or rather on what the latter imagines this ratio to be. Usually he will fight and to try and save his skin, and only if the power confronting him appears overwhelming will he abandon the attempt. The touch to which one resigns oneself because all resistance appears hopeless, and particularly so as regards the future, has, in our society, become the arrest. The feel of the hand of authority on his shoulder is usually enough to make a man give himself up without having to be actually seized. He cowers and goes quietly. He maintains an appearance of composure, even though it is not everywhere that this is justified by what is likely to happen to him subsequently. The next stage of approach is the act of seizure. The fingers of the hand form a hollow into which they try to compress part of the creature they touch. They do this without regard to the shape and organic cohesion of the prey. Whether they injure it or not at this stage is irrelevant, it is simply that some part of its body has to be got into the space thus formed as a pledge for the whole. This space within the grasping hand is the anteroom of the mouth and the stomach by which the prey is finally incorporated. With many animals it is the armed mouth itself which does the seizing, instead of hand or claw. Among men the hand which never lets go has become the very emblem of power. He was delivered into his hands, he was in their hands, it is in God's hands. Similar expressions are common in all languages. For the actual process of seizing, what is really important is the pressure exerted by the human hand. The fingers close round the object seized, the hollow space into which this has been forced narrows. The aim is to be able to feel it with the whole inner surface of the hand, and to feel it more firmly. The original lightness and delicacy of touch is first extended to a wider area, then strengthened, and finally concentrated until that part of the body which is touched is as firmly compressed as possible. Pressure of this kind came to supersede the habit of using claws to rend the victim. It is true that in some archaic cults the victim was still clawed, but the actors were disguised as animals and what they did was deliberately bestial. For the real job, men came to rely on their teeth. Pressure can increase until it crushes. Whether it actually reaches this point or not depends on how dangerous the prey is. If the attacker has had a hard fight to overcome it, if he has been seriously threatened by it, or enraged or injured, he will want to make it pay for this and will press harder than is necessary to make sure of it. But even more than fear or rage, it is contempt which urges him on to crush it. An insect, something so small that it scarcely counts, is crushed because one would not otherwise know what had happened to it. No human hand can form a hollow small enough for it. But, in addition to the desire to get rid of a pest and to be sure it is really disposed of, our behavior to a gnat or flea betrays the contempt we feel for a being which is utterly defenseless, which exists in a completely different order of size and power from us, with which we have nothing in common, into which we never transform ourselves and which we never fear except when it suddenly appears in crowds. The destruction of these tiny creatures is the only act of violence which remains unpunished even within us. Their blood does not stain our hands, for it does not remind us of our own. We never look into their glazing eyes. We do not eat them. They have never, at least not amongst us in the West, had the benefit of our growing, if not yet very effective, concern for life. In brief, they are outlaws. If I say to someone, "I could crush you with one hand," I am expressing the greatest possible contempt. It is as though I were saying, "You are an insect. You mean nothing to me. I can do what I like with you and that won't mean anything to me either. You mean nothing to anyone. You can be destroyed with impunity without anyone noticing. It would make no difference to anyone. Certainly not to me." The most extreme form of destruction through pressure, that is, grinding, requires a great preponderance of weight in hard objects above and below, between which something is ground. If he wants to do this himself, man has to use his teeth. In general, we do not think of something living when we speak of grinding. The process is relegated to inorganic nature. The word being most frequently used in connection grinding cannot be achieved by the hand, for this is too soft, with natural catastrophes such as the fall of large rocks which grind or pulverize living creatures. The word is used in a figurative sense, but is never taken quite literally. It conveys the idea of a destructive power not really proper to man himself. There is something impersonal about it. The body as such is not capable of grinding and therefore magnanimously renounces it. The most it is capable of is an iron grip. It is remarkable what respect this is accorded. The functions of the hand are so manifold that it is not surprising that there should be a large number of expressions connected with them. But the hand's real glory derives from the grip, that central and most often celebrated act of power. The moment of seizing, which is decisive amongst animals as well as amongst men, has always created the strongest impression on men, and their superstitious awe of the great cats of prey, the tiger and the lion, is based upon it. These are the great seizers and they do their seizing alone. With them, the lying in wait and watching, the sudden leap, the thrusting in of the claws and the mauling are all still one. The momentum of the action, its pitilessness, the assurance with which it is carried out, the never-questioned superiority of the killer, the fact that he can choose whatever he wants as his prey, all this has contributed to his enormous prestige. However we look at it, this is the highest concentration of power and, as such, has made an ineradicable impression on man. All kings have wanted to be lions. It is the very act of seizing and its success which has been admired and praised. The simple exercise of superior strength has been universally regarded as courage and greatness. The lion does not have to transform himself in order to catch his prey, he remains himself throughout. Before he goes hunting he makes himself known by his roar, he alone can afford to announce his intention loudly and audibly to every creature. This reveals an indestructible arrogance which can never be deflected and which, for this very reason, spreads even greater terror. Power at its core and its apex despises transformation. It is sufficient unto itself and wills only itself. In this form it has always seemed remarkable to man, free and absolute, it exists for nothing and no one except itself. This is the peak of its glory and, to this very day, it seems as though there were nothing which could prevent its reappearance in the same form. There is, however, a second act of power which is not quite so glorious but no less essential. Dazzled by the grandeur of the act of seizing we tend to forget that there is something equally important which runs parallel to it, namely, to avoid being seized. All the empty space which a man who holds power creates round himself serves this second purpose. Every man, even the least, seeks to prevent anyone else coming too near him. Every form of social life established amongst men expresses itself in distances which allay the ceaseless fear of being seized and caught. Symmetry, which is so striking a feature of many ancient civilizations, derives in part from man's attempt to create uniform distances all round himself. Within these civilizations, safety is based on distances and is also emblematically expressed by them. The ruler on whose existence that of everyone else depends stands furthest and most clearly apart. In this, and not only in his splendor, he is equated with the sun, or, as among the Chinese, with the sky itself, which is even more spacious. Access to him is made difficult, palaces with more and more rooms being built round him. Each gate and each door is heavily guarded so that it is impossible to intrude on him against his will. He, from his remote security, can have anyone seized wherever he may be. But how is anyone to seize him, protected as he is by his hundredfold separation? The actual incorporation of the prey begins in the mouth. From hand to mouth is the route followed by everything which can be eaten. Among the many creatures which have no arms for grasping, the process is initiated by the mouth itself, by the teeth or by a beak protruding from it. The most striking natural instrument of power in man and in many animals is the teeth. The way they are arranged in rows and their shining smoothness are quite different from anything else belonging to the body. One feels tempted to call them the very first manifestation of order, and one so striking that it almost shouts for recognition. It is an order which operates as a threat to the world outside, not always visible, but visible whenever the mouth opens, which is often. The substance of the teeth differs from that of all the other visible parts of the body and would be impressive even if people only had 2 teeth. They are smooth, hard and unyielding and can be clenched without any change of shape. They make the same effect as well-polished and firmly set stones. From a very early stage man used all kinds of stones as weapons and tools, but it was a long time before he learnt to polish them to the smoothness of teeth. It is probable that his teeth served him as a model for the improvement of his tools. The teeth of all kinds of large animals had always been useful to him. He might have captured them at the risk of his life, and some of the power of the animal which had threatened him still seemed to him to be contained in them. He wore them as trophies and talismans to pass on to others the terror they had once aroused in him. He proudly displayed on his body the scars they had caused. These ranked as badges of honor and were so much desired that they were often artificially produced. Thus both his own teeth and those of alien and stronger animals affected man in a wide variety of ways. By their very nature they occupied a position midway between an actual part of the body and a tool. The fact that they could fall out, or be knocked out, made them even more like a tool. Smoothness and order, the manifest attributes of the teeth, have entered into the very nature of power. They are inseparable from it and, in every manifestation of power, they are the first things to be established. The conjunction began with primitive tools, but, as power grew, these early attributes became more pronounced. The leap from stone to metal was perhaps the most striking move in the direction of increased smoothness. However much stone was polished, the sword, made first of bronze and then of iron, was smoother. The real attraction of metal lies in the fact that it is smoother than anything else. In the machines and vehicles of the contemporary world, smoothness has increased and has also become smoothness of performance. Language expresses this very simply. We say everything is going smoothly, or functions smoothly, and we mean by this that some process is completely and undisturbed within our power. In modern life the bias towards smoothness has spread to fields where it formerly tended to be avoided. Houses and furniture used to be decorated, as were the limbs and bodies of men. Modes of decoration changed, but decoration always existed and was obstinately preserved even after it had lost its symbolical meaning. Today smoothness has conquered our houses, their walls and all the objects we put into them. Ornament and decoration are despised and regarded as a sign of bad taste. We speak of function, clarity of line and utility, but what has really triumphed is smoothness, and the prestige of the power it conceals. The example of modern architecture shows how difficult it is to separate smoothness from order. Their common history is old as the teeth. The uniformity of the whole row of front teeth and the regular spaces between them stood as models for many different kinds of arrangements. Many of those which we take for granted today may originally have derived from them. The order of military formations, which is artificially created by man himself, is in myth connected with teeth. The soldiers of Cadmus, who sprang from the soil, were sown as dragons' teeth. There are certainly other instances of order to be seen in nature, that of various grasses for example, and the more rigid one of trees. But man did not find these in himself as he did teeth, they were not so directly and uninterruptedly linked with his intake of food, and it was not so easy to make use of them. It was the fact that the teeth are used for biting which so emphatically drew man's attention to their order, and the fact that they fall out with unpleasant consequences which made him conscious of the importance of this order. The teeth are the armed guardians of the mouth, and the mouth is indeed a strait place, the prototype of all prisons. Whatever goes in there is lost, and much goes in whilst still alive. Large numbers of animals first kill their prey only in the mouth, and some not even then. The readiness with which the mouth opens in anticipation of prey, the ease with which, once shut, it remains shut, recall the most feared attributes of a prison. It can scarcely be wrong to assume that the mouth did in fact exert a hidden influence on prisons. Primitive man certainly knew other creatures besides whales in whose mouth there was room for him. In this terrible place nothing could thrive, even if there were time to settle there. It is barren and nothing can take root in it. When the gaping maws of dragons had been virtually extirpated, man found a symbolic substitute for them in prisons. In times when these used to be torture chambers they resembled a hostile mouth in many respects. Hell still presents the same appearance today. Prisons, on the other hand, have become puritanical. The smoothness of teeth has conquered the world, the walls of cells are all smooth and even the window opening is small. For the prisoner, freedom is the space beyond the clenched teeth, and these are now represented by the bare walls of his cell. The narrow gorge through which everything has to pass is, for the few who live so long, the ultimate terror. Man's imagination has been continually occupied by the several stages of incorporation. The gaping jaws of the large beasts which threatened him have pursued him even into his dreams and myths. Voyages of discovery down these jaws were no less important to him than those over the sea, and certainly as dangerous. Some who had given up all hope were pulled living out of the maw of these beasts and bore the marks of their teeth on them for the rest of their lives. The road that the prey travels through the body is a long one, and on the way all its substance is sucked out of it, everything useful is abstracted from it till all that remains is refuse and stench. This process, which stands at the end of every act of seizing, gives us a clue to the nature of power in general. Anyone who wants to rule men first tries to humiliate them, to trick them out of their rights and their capacity for resistance, until they are as powerless before him as animals. He uses them like animals and, even if he does not tell them so, in himself he always knows quite clearly that they mean just as little to him. When he speaks to his intimates he will call them sheep or cattle. His ultimate aim is to incorporate them into himself and to suck the substance out of them. What remains of them afterwards does not matter to him. The worse he has treated them, the more he despises them. When they are no more use at all, he disposes of them as he does of his excrement, simply seeing to it that they do not poison the air of his house. He will not dare to identify all the individual stages of this process even to himself. If he is a braggart he may admit to his familiars that he degrades to the status of animals the men he procures for himself. But, since he does not have his subjects slaughtered in slaughter-houses nor actually use them to feed his body, he will deny that he sucks them dry and digests them. On the contrary, it is he who feeds them. Thus it is easy to overlook the real nature of these processes, particularly as man has learned to keep animals which he does not kill, or not immediately, since they are of more use to him in other ways. But, quite apart from the person who wields power and knows how to concentrate so much in his two hands, the relation of each and every man to his own excrement belongs to the sphere of power. Nothing has been so much part of one as that which turns into excrement. The constant pressure which, during the whole of its long progress through the body, is applied to the prey which has become food, its dissolution and intimate union with the creature digesting it, the complete and final annihilation, first of all functions and then of everything which once constituted its individuality, its assimilation to something already existing, that is, to the body of the eater. All this may very well be seen as the central, if most hidden, process of power. It is so much a matter of course, so automatic and so far beyond consciousness, that one underrates its importance. One tends to see only the thousand tricks of power which are enacted above ground, but these are the least part of it. Underneath, day in, day out, is digestion and again digestion. Something alien is seized, cut up into small bits, incorporated into oneself, and assimilated. By this process alone man lives. If it ceases, he dies. So much he has always known. But it is clear that all the phases of this process, and not only the external and half-conscious ones, must have their correspondence in the psyche. It is not altogether easy to find these correspondences. We shall, however, come on clear traces of them in the course of our enquiry, and shall follow them up. As will be seen, the symptoms of melancholia are especially illuminating in this context. The excrement, which is what remains of all this, is loaded with our whole blood guilt. By it we know what we have murdered. It is the compressed sum of all the evidence against us. It is our daily and continuing sin and, as such, it stinks and cries to heaven. It is remarkable how we isolate ourselves with it, in special rooms, set aside for the purpose, we get rid of it, our most private moment is when we withdraw there, we are alone only with our excrement. It is clear that we are ashamed of it. It is the age-old seal of that power process of digestion, which is enacted in darkness and which, without this, would remain hidden forever.